Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third episode of Couch Conversations. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Simone Silver today. Simone is an esteemed guest. In fact, I think you have like a 2-year waiting list, which is mad.
Not true.
Um,
All myth.
Simone is a medical doctor and she's branched out and specialized into integrative health with a special focus on hormonal health. Um, Funny enough, Simone was my head girl. Yeah, our paths have crossed a lot over the years. We had children at similar times, so we have a lot in common. But today we are here to talk about hormonal health and female health in general, being August and Women's Month. I think we've got a lot to chat about. So welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Simone, we've got a lot to unpack here. And, the whole idea behind Couch Conversations is that we are turning health concepts into a conversation you have with your best friend.
Yeah.
So making it easy to unpack and understand. What I think maybe we should start with is, what is health?
I actually love that as a starting point because we take this concept of health for granted. I mean, we talk health in our day-to-day conversations. We hear about it in the media, we read about it, but how often do we actually stop and consider, what does health mean? What does health mean to me? And I bet you, Laura, if you actually posed this question to a room full of people, you would get completely different answers from people. For some people, it's very physically based. It's about energy or mood or vitality. For other people, it's more emotional. It's about calmness. It could be about hobbies, music, sport, whatever it is. But I love the idea of actually clarifying what our concept of health is, because then it gives us a blueprint. If we want to work with something, if we want to change something, we need to understand it, because we can't change what we don't understand. So I think a beautiful framework for understanding health is that it's a state of functioning well to our very, very best, but in 4 very specific dimensions of life. The one is physical, within our bodies. The other is mental health. The third is societal health. So this would speak to our relationships with partners, children, relationships within the workplace, our occupational lives, and then society and community at large. And then the 4th dimension, which I find absolutely fascinating, is termed as spiritual health. And obviously this is a highly personalized thing to different people. But what I find fascinating is that the World Health Organization has really spent the last couple of years focusing on this 4th dimension. And it speaks to things like we all have unique potential, and expressing that unique potential to its fullest is a very important component of spiritual health and health at large. So there is a sense of, we need tranquility, we need a sense of self-awareness, the ability to grow, to thrive, and to transform, to be healthy as well.
Yeah, and I think that'll resonate with a lot of people. It's about purpose as well, finding your purpose, and like you say, how you can imprint yourself in life. And I really love that.
Absolutely.
That's a huge conversation, and I think that's another couch conversation. So we're going to focus on mental health and physical health, and I guess they kind of weave into one another with this whole mind-body connection, and then hormones come in there as well. So maybe we just want to touch on there and open that conversation in terms of that connection.
I think this is vital for people to understand. The mind-body connection is well established in science. It's not airy-fairy in concept. It's actually really heavily supported by scientific literature. And it's a fundamental principle of health and personal transformation, because thoughts, emotions affect our chemistry, and our chemistry affects our thoughts, emotions, and how we experience the world. And since we're talking hormonal health today, this is such a great example of where hormones play. So if we consider our 2 main female hormones, estrogen and progesterone, we often think of them and we think of female stuff, menstrual cycles, boobs, womb, all very true and relevant. But in the brain, they have so many vital functions. And one of them is that they regulate our neurochemicals that are responsible for mood, how we concentrate, how we show up in the world. There are many different kinds of neurochemicals, but perhaps the ones that we know about mostly would be something like serotonin, which is sort of, we call it the happy neurochemical, but in fact, it's a great mood stabilizer and balancer. And dopamine, which is where we get our mojo and motivation from. So our female hormones are intricately connected to these happy, motivating neurochemicals. So it would make a lot of sense that when we go through times of hormonal flux or deficiency, that mood, memory, motivation become major symptoms.
Absolutely. And then obviously your gut health ties into that as well. And you know, as you were talking about like the physical manifestation of you know, stress or hormones on your overall health, it takes me back to when I did my driver's license or my driving test. And wow, was my stomach in all states of turmoil before I wrote that test. And that was the pure, like, the nerves, you know, that gut brain axis. There was, you know, no controlling that. So yeah, I think you know, a lot of people can resonate with that, and how emotions can play a part on things. But I guess that gut brain axis is quite an interesting one to look at as well. And like maybe talking about how the gut, the brain, and hormones are all interlinked.
Great conversation. Great sort of triangle or triad, gut, brain, hormones. There's such a fundamental relationship. I think that in the sphere of gut health, we're learning a lot. It's out there, it's in the media. We are understanding that gut health influences health of the whole body, particularly around immune system health. But we also understand that we make neurochemicals in the gut, like serotonin. And in fact, we make more serotonin in the gut than the brain, which is quite a trippy thought.
Fascinating, yeah.
So it's well worth really striving for a healthy gut. But also the hormonal connection is that when we look at female hormone balance, it's not as simple as, do you have enough estrogen? Do you have enough progesterone? It also goes a lot further into how your body processes those hormones and how you eliminate them. So the elimination piece is where the gut comes in. We actually have a fascinating set of bacteria in the gut called the estrobolome. Have you heard of it before?
I have. They metabolize estrogen.
Yeah, 4 marks. Well done. You haven't changed a bit.
Yeah, but the name is also quite
you were like
explanatory.
You were like, boys got the answer right.
I'll try.
So the estrobolome is something that I didn't know about until just a few years ago. And it really adds another layer of understanding and complexity to our hormonal health. Basically, it's a bunch of bacteria that processes or handles estrogen in the body. And these bacteria decide how much estrogen is going to be reabsorbed into your bloodstream, into your circulation, and how much is going to be pooped out, basically eliminated. So it can change the balance of estrogen in a woman's body at any given time.
So how would someone know if they have too much or too little estrogen? So, I mean, basically what I'm getting out of this is that as if your gut bacteria is in a healthy, balanced state, you're going to have more feel-good hormones, and your hormonal balance will be better. But I guess a lot of people are wondering, am I hormonally balanced? Is my mood normal? So what are the key signs we can pick up both from a mood perspective and a hormonal perspective?
That's such a great question. I say this often to women, is that the key to understanding whether your hormones are high or low is actually more in your symptoms. So your symptoms are messages. It's your body's way of talking to you. I find a lot of women want proof in blood tests. And there are limits to that because hormones flux, they change all the time, and we cannot always pin down a problem on blood testing. I think it's worth just putting that out there.
Mm.
So, to your point, listening to symptoms and decoding them is super, super important.
Mm.
So, let's go into a couple. So, if we have too much estrogen, for example, generally our boobs talk to us, so breast sensitivity. We may have an increase in breast size. We may have weight gain.
Oh, I could do with some of that estrogen.
Too much is too much, and too little is too little. There really is this concept of a hormone sweet spot in every woman. So the idea of too much is not a good thing and too little is not a good thing. But yeah, estrogen overload, so weight gain, breast symptoms, heavier periods, more predisposition to things like cysts, fibroids. Mood-wise, we can become quite sensitive, quite labile or easily tearful, easy to cry. If we have too little estrogen, as in what many women go through in the menopause, estrogen declines, mood can be profoundly affected because of estrogen's role in regulating serotonin in the brain. When we've lost that estrogen, mood can become really, really low. And depression can become a real issue that a lot of women have to face. Anxiety as well. And then the typical sort of low estrogen symptoms that we see in menopause would be the hot flushes, the night sweats, the leaky bladder, the joint achiness, the dryness. It's a juicy hormone. It's a lubricating hormone. So without it, we have sort of dry skin. Vaginal dryness is a big problem. So those are just some of the examples of estrogen.
Sulforaphane is one of my absolute favorite products, not just for detoxification after a big night, but also for hormonal detoxifications, metabolizing estrogen in particular. It's a wonderful product, and why it's so incredibly advanced is that it has a very high yield of sulforaphane, and it's from 100% pure broccoli extract. Remember, you can use the code Couch Conversations for 100 Rand off your next order. Now let's go back to the show. So, I just want to draw it back because there are a couple of things you said that if I put my consumer hat on, I might be confused by. So we're talking about blood tests that don't show up, if you're maybe reaching perimenopause, and then all these mixed signals from your body where you're not sure if it's stress, life, hormones. So how do we figure out whether we're perimenopausal or not?
That's such a great question. So it's a journey, it's a process. You can consider working with a practitioner to help you sort of untangle these threads because there is a complexity and there are layers. And there is value in looking through the lens of blood tests to see if we can get some kind of confirmation. But in my experience, usually hormone imbalances only show up on blood tests much later on in the perimenopausal journey. So when our hormones are really that much lower, then we sort of see that coming through in the blood tests. Really early on in our late 30s, early 40s, we often don't pick up the subtle changes in hormones. So these really subtle changes in hormones can produce symptoms for women. And just because it's not picked up on a blood test, I think what I'd like to say to you is it doesn't mean that you're not going through hormonal flux or transition. Some women are really sensitive to small changes in their hormones and have lots of symptoms. And other women are completely different and feel absolutely fine, even if their hormones are massively out of balance. So I think it's also important to realize that our experience of hormone imbalance is so different from woman to woman. But listen to your body. Nobody knows your body better than you.
So we're obviously a natural health company.
Yeah.
And I know that part of this journey would probably involve hormonal supplementation in some form. But when it comes to natural supplementation in the form of botanicals, vitamins, minerals, aminos, what can we do to support this perimenopausal phase? And then we should probably talk also during your reproductive and your fertile years, what supplements would you recommend and do you really prescribe? So gut health we've covered. So obviously probiotics, high quality probiotics, full spectrum probiotics are important. But during perimenopause, what supplements do you recommend during this transitional phase?
So I think to answer that question, let's again first understand what the hormonal imbalance is of perimenopause. So we touched earlier that the first thing that happens is we have a decline in progesterone. But what's happening to the estrogen in these years? So the estrogen is really volatile, and she's going up, she's going down, she's all over the place. And that's why there's this turbulence to these years. So to apply a blueprint of treatment would be something along the framework of how do we make sure that our estrogen load is balanced, is okay, is not too high, and how do we bring up the progesterone levels to balance. So a critical take-home point here is women feel good when estrogen and progesterone are in balance, like a yin and yang. It's the principle of health throughout the body balance. So when we in our perimenopausal years, we want to look after our gut so that we know that we are processing our estrogen well. We want to look after our livers because we know that hormones are detoxified and processed in the liver as well, so that can help us with hormonal balance. And we want to really look at the diet. So for example, a really high fiber diet that's quite rich in phytoestrogens can really help with that flux of estrogen as it's going up and down. So plant-based estrogens, phytoestrogens, can bind to estrogen receptors and give us relief when hormone levels drop too low, and give us relief when they go too high. So they're nice buffers that we can use.
So what are examples of phytoestrogens?
So we could look at things like flax seeds are fantastic, legumes, but basically a diet that's very rich in fruit and veggies, because that's where we get most of our fiber from, is absolutely critical in hormonal health. And there have been cases of women who suffer from tremendous PMS that get quite a lot of relief from just those small changes in diet.
Amazing. So you spoke about detoxification, which is quite interesting because, you know, I feel like in general, people feel like detoxification has to do with toxins in the form of alcohol.
Yeah.
You know?
Or like quite hippie stuff.
Yeah, correct. So you're talking about detoxification in the form of hormones. So one of our products is sulforaphane, and that's essentially a broccoli sprout extract, and that's got a lot of research behind it for estrogen metabolism. So maybe we can just touch on that and, you know, why is this detoxification, hormonal detoxification, so important?
Okay, great question. I think that's an amazing point. Is that, you know, first of all, I think we should be careful of going on these kind of detox hunts that are not scientifically proven, that can cause actually potential health issues. So just to put that out there. But when we talk detoxification, medically speaking, we actually have we have many detoxification pathways in the liver. The liver is our primary organ where we detoxify. And we know that detoxifying hormones may affect hormonal health. So estrogen, for example, when it arrives in the liver, it goes through a process of kind of like a conveyor belt. You know, if you're in a factory and there's stuff going on a conveyor belt and it gets added to, or things get taken away, and then at the end of that you have your final product. It's the very same with hormones in the liver. So estrogen itself is broken down into daughter estrogens. Some of them are good, so they cause no health problems, and some are bad. I actually teach my patients it's like Cinderella, the good estrogens versus the ugly sisters. So we have these two bad daughters of estrogen that may be implicated in hormonal symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And sulforaphane is such an amazing compound because it really supports the detoxification pathways that would help us shunt to more Cinderella production and less ugly sister production.
So we've spoken about perimenopause, but we haven't spoken about menopause, which is obviously the glaring sign at the end of perimenopause. And, you know, with this comes bone health issues, heart health issues. I think there's a lot to unpack there. So, what are the key things we need to focus on when we're in menopause? And yeah, how can we really prevent big health issues from taking their toll?
First and foremost, the first conversation that should be had when a woman is transitioning into menopause is, what do you know about hormone replacement therapy, and how do you feel about it? Because at some point as women, we have to make the decision whether we're going to use hormone replacement therapy or not. And that is a discussion of really understanding what the benefits may be, what the risks may be. And I think that every woman should know that the risks of hormone replacement have changed. We've evolved in our science, we've evolved in our thinking, and that change in risk needs to be communicated to women. So that's a critical discussion that needs to take place. We also need to respect, I believe, as practitioners, that once each woman is informed of those benefits or risks, we then need to respect that the decision that each woman makes for herself. It's so important to understand hormones and hormone replacement for this very point, is that I find most women are afraid of breast cancer, and that sort of steers them away from hormone replacement therapy, but at the same time are not informed or educated about where hormones can be so beneficial. So again, we said earlier, your estrogen and progesterone have actions from the top of your head to the tips of your toe, in your brain, in your heart, in your bone, in your joints, all the time. It's not just about minimizing breast cancer risk, but it's also about saying, well, can I improve my longevity and my health quality and protect my heart and protect my brain? Because we know that female hormones regulate inflammation and the immune system. So there are all these aspects to hormonal replacement therapy that should be discussed with each woman, as well as what the risk for breast cancer could look like, which would also change. We know today that there are different types of hormones. There are different ways of using hormones. You can take them in a pill, you can use them on the skin, in a patch, or in a cream. And depending on all of these things, they may change what your risks are. So it's a really important conversation. But I think to your point earlier, once that conversation has been had and there's really, really good education and understanding around it, and a clear decision, because women need to also use their instincts and intuition when it comes to treatment, we need to consider that menopause is a multi-system experience. It's not a disease. It is a rite of passage for women, but it is certainly not just about hot flushes or vaginal dryness. It is brain, heart health, joint health, all of these things that we've discussed. So it's important that all the systems in the body are supported. And again, we could bring in a good omega-3 to limit the kind of potential for chronic inflammation, to offer the body some extra lubrication, for example. We may bring in a bit of extra magnesium or calcium or vitamin D or vitamin K2 if we're worried about osteoporosis and thinning bones. So in my mind, at least, the treatment toolkit for menopause is varied and diverse and should be completely individualized. A part of that toolkit is hormonal replacement or not, and the other part would be diet, lifestyle, exercise, and the appropriate supplements, depending on what someone needs.
All of the products we've just discussed can be bought on the phytoceutics.com website. Search under hormonal health and use the coupon code Couch Conversations for 100 Rand off your next order. Let's go back to the show. So Another topic that comes up a lot amongst females, and I guess in hormonal health as well, is sex and libido.
Yeah. Yeah. Big
Um,
one.
yeah, exactly. I hope I'm not blushing, but
Why are you blushing? Let's talk about that. Own it, girl.
so as I mean, we all know that as you hit puberty and you start to see men and understand that there might, or women, and that there's a connection there. Then libido or your sexual desire is probably highest in your 30s, 20s, 30s. But again, as you start to age, this can change.
Sure.
So, what are, I guess, the tactics to mitigate this?
So when we think libido from a hormonal health point of view, obviously the first thing we think about is what are my male hormones doing? Because testosterone, being our main male hormone, drives libido and it supports sexual function enormously. So it becomes a huge issue as women age. Our male hormones often decline. When we go into menopause and the ovaries stop working, obviously we can't make estrogen and progesterone anymore, but we still make some testosterone in the adrenal glands. So what I find is some women after menopause are able to maintain their own testosterone levels and others aren't. And it really depends on how stressed you are, etc., etc. So if you're in your midlife and you're really struggling with libido, it's worth looking at testosterone levels, make sure your levels are okay. But also we should understand that estrogen and progesterone also support libido and sex drive in their own ways. So again, just really looking at the whole hormonal picture. But hormones aside, obviously a healthy lifestyle, eating sensibly, exercising can increase male hormone levels beautifully for women. So those are important.
And then obviously sleep as well, right? Because
critical.
I think we all know if you're not sleeping properly, everything's out of whack.
Everything's out of whack.
Yeah. And then I guess stress hormones also have, and just general stress have a lot to do with libido as well.
Huge. So a great way to think about this is if we're stressed, if we're in high cortisol, high adrenaline mode, the body is super intelligent. The body is saying survive. So all resources are being diverted to cortisol and stress hormone production, and nothing is being dedicated to the fun, lovely stuff. So things like libido tank, things like gut health don't become the priority. Things like immune health tank, because the body's saying, I don't have time for your immune system. I'm surviving here. This is where all resources need to go. So stress is such a major one where women and men, but women particularly, shut down. And there's a physical component to it for sure, but also there's a very emotional component to it. And I think I'd like to maybe speak to libido from this angle is that it's not always physical. It's not always hormonal. I think women need to be in a state of openness, in a state of play, in a state of receptivity to enjoy that kind of space. And again, speaking to the challenges of our lives and the many forces at play and demands, it often takes us out of that space. So I'm a great believer in vitamin P, pleasure and play, and bringing it into our daily lives and spicing up.
There's a product there, vitamin P.
Absolutely.
Oh, we're so complicated or intricate or multi-layered. Let's put a positive slant on it.
Absolutely.
You mentioned cortisol, and I want to bring that up because there's a lot trending on cortisol face at the moment. Have you heard of this?
Of course. So in medical school, when we learnt about diseases of cortisol, so when we talk stress, it's not a disease, it's a state of being, a state of higher cortisol or lower cortisol or nervous system dysregulation. But you can get diseases like Cushing's disease, where cortisol is abnormally high and you get a moon face. There is a puffiness and a roundness to the face that can happen. And we also talk about cortisol belly. So when we're stressed, how we kind of get this, this belly this muffin top belly that can happen. And that's really also around cortisol triggering a kind of insulin resistance picture and just gaining weight around the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's some research on ashwagandha and its benefits when it comes to cortisol, when it comes to stress reduction. What are your thoughts around this, and is this something that you've used in your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So ashwagandha is an adaptogenic herb, meaning that it has many functions in the body. It typically acts on the brain, on the nerves, and on the adrenal glands. So if we look at why it could help to use it when we're chronically stressed, is because stress is not just about cortisol production. Stress is actually a coordinated response in the body by your brain, by your adrenal glands, where cortisol is made, and by your nerves. So it's not all about the cortisol and all about the adrenal glands. It's very much about your neurochemistry, your autonomic nervous system, and your adrenals. And adaptogenic herbs have actually been used for millennia to manage stress for this reason, because they speak to and buffer some of the imbalances in all those systems that are connected in stress.
Yeah, I mean, our ancestors were smart.
They were smart. We kind of need to return,
We
right?
need to go back to the basics.
Yeah.
Barefoot, foraging.
Body soul
Absolutely.
connection.
Let's move to a farm.
Isn't that a beautiful issue? I mean, in ancient Greece, in medicine of those times, there was no question of unity between mind, body, soul. It was always there. So where did we become so separatist in our thinking?
Yeah.
But I think what's beautiful is we are returning to this concept of wholeness. And in physical health and in using ashwagandha and stress as a great model or example of this, the systems of the body are all interconnected, And whilst it's really critical to be able to look at each system in a specialist way, so we have our specialists, and thank goodness for them. We need their expertise and their skill. So when you go to the cardiologist, you have that lens to look through at your heart health. But at the same time, we also need to be able to step back, broaden the lens, and look at the connections between all our systems, because the body is a system of systems.
Totally. Be in tune.
Yeah.
Just to close off, we know that modern diets and lifestyles are not what they used to be. We are no longer living in the ancient Greek times or on farms. A lucky few are. But in general, what would you say are the nutrients that people are lacking in their diets due to lifestyle and just the general quality of food? And in that similar vein, what supplements in general do you recommend that everyone takes that can benefit their overall health?
So I would say in general, obviously it varies from person to person, but in general, if we're eating a fairly reasonable diet, there would be three things that we could still probably not get enough of from that diet. The one would be vitamin D, because we get it mainly from sunlight. And most of us today are wearing sunscreen, or we're working indoors and our exposure is not there. And it's very difficult to get vitamin D levels up from food. So vitamin D is quite critical, but it's also important, if you are going to supplement, that you do check in on your blood levels, because we know that over supplementing with vitamin D can lead to toxicity, toxic levels that can be dangerous. So you've got to keep tabs there with your practitioner. The second thing would be a good omega-3 fatty acid. So in nutritional circles, we know that even a really balanced diet is usually more rich in omega-6s. So if we're eating good fats in our diet, usually we're getting more omega-6s and not enough omega-3s. Omega-6s can tip the scales towards being pro-inflammatory, and the omega-3 is certainly highly anti-inflammatory, and again, very hard to get enough of in the diet. So a great thing to supplement with. And then the last thing would be a good probiotic. I know we talk about being able to eat probiotic-rich foods, but in my experience, most people don't sit and eat enough kefir or yogurt or kombucha every day. So I think really supplementing with a probiotic has huge value, as we were chatting about earlier, around how pivotal gut health is. So those would be my top three. And then, of course, over and above that, we would need to really look at the individual and what their individual requirements could be.
So there you have it, folks. Go and have your bloods tested and make an appointment with Simone. I'm going to be first on the list, so you can fight me for her airtime. I think we can all agree we have learned so much. I've learned a lot, so thank you. It's been wonderful connecting with you and chatting to you. And to all you Phyto females out there, we celebrate you and thank you for listening to our couch conversation. If you liked this episode, please like or subscribe. If there are any topics or guests you'd like us to have on the show, please let us know in the comments below.